panels talked about. Not at all, unless you're working for one of the firms that is leading that process. If you look at the view of consumers going back over long periods of time, they are ambivalent about competition. Schumpeter's famous essay now, 1942, his famous chapter on competition talks about a process of destruction. He doesn't talk about a process of casual, easy adjustment. He talks about destruction. He uses martial imagery to talk about what happens in the process of competition. And he says in particular, what does competition do to incumbent firms? It destroys them like a bombardment. He's writing as though he's a general talking about combat. Bombardments, if you ever lived through one, are not pleasant things. And they're not very good if it's your industry that's getting the incoming and your incumbent firm is getting destroyed. If you're an employee for that firm, if you live in that community, that's very upsetting. It was common to hear in the U.S., certainly in some of the bubbles in Washington and elsewhere, to hear people say, I don't know about anyone who's voting for Trump. I know nobody. I knew lots of people. Friends, relatives living in places like Scranton, Pennsylvania, Youngstown, Ohio, Detroit, Michigan, where I spent my childhood. They voted for Trump. Trump took that entire belt of states and wrapped them up. And what do they think about competition, trade? They think these are anathema. These are the things that destroyed my job. These are the reasons I'm working twice as hard today to earn half as much as I did 10 years ago. And I'm not happy about this process at all. So that if we ask, what about the culture of competition? I would suggest to you many citizens are deeply schizophrenic about what they think about competition. Love it as buyers, not so sure as workers or as inhabitants of individual communities. That's clearly part of the Brexit mood. And third, and closely related, there's a deep sense by the have-nots that their governments have betrayed them. And who are the agents of betrayal? The famous elites, people who went to good schools, live in good neighborhoods with good postal codes, whose children go to good primary schools, good jobs in good respectable settings. These are the people who set up the framework of economic organization, political organization that has left them behind. And when the objection is raised, what do the elites and their elected officials say? It's good for you in the long run. It'll all turn out okay. What about now? What about my family? There's some countries, and the U.S. is one of them, that if you take away the expectation that life's going to get better, not for me, but for my children, for my grandchildren, that I'll invest everything today in the form of future gratification. You take away that hope, you have an explosive combination in a politically volatile environment. And yes, it's not just the elites, it's all the organizations they're so fond of, domestic and international, in which they have such great hopes. This is the Brexit impulse and mood, and I'll suggest to you in different jurisdictions, you see variations of it that are powerful. Thank you. What does this mean for competition law? None of this is good for competition law. This is dangerous. For starters, it creates the potential for greater fragmentation. It's happening. The United Kingdom suddenly has a much more important competition authority than it did before June 23rd. It will now stand on its own. It will be another gate through which competition policy passes in merger review. Precisely what that will look like, I don't know. What will the exact form of the separation be from the European Union? Too early to tell. But that is one additional jurisdiction now that will have considerable capacity to affect the well-being of individual transactions. And it's not just, of course, the United Kingdom spin-off that will be one part, one consequence of Brexit. You have the continuing development, which the last panel referred to. Rough count now, how many countries have competition agencies? About 130. How many of those have merger review mechanisms that I would say at least are nominally robust? It's about 100. About 90 of those like mandatory pre-merger notification. But the list is growing. Chile, new addition in Latin America. In Africa, despite the existence of several existing networks, you have new networks that are being formed, often overlapping with the membership of existing networks that want to establish merger control. And in the Caribbean, a subset of the CARICOM members, which have merger control, want to establish their own merger control regime because they're not happy with CARICOM and the way it's being run. So the general trend at the moment, as suggested by our colleagues a few moments ago, is toward greater complexity and fragmentation. And all of the centrifugal forces that we observe in the political process today are pushing in that direction. Second, diminished pro-competitive forces. If you're a competition policy person and you're thinking about what promotes competition, you better like trade. You better like what trade has done to put pressure on incumbents who became lazy. If you're a purchaser of an automobile in North America, every night you burn incense, you light a candle to whatever cosmic force you worship and say, thank God for trade. Because that's what created genuine rivalry from the mid-70s onward in the automobile sector and for consumer electronics. It shook up sleepy, inattentive sectors and made them run hard again and changed life. You take trade out of the picture, of course there are going to be technical issues about who's in the market, who's out of the market, who counts for purposes of measuring market power and market participants. That's a technical issue. But you look at the broader impact on rivalry, you relax the pressure that comes from trade, you're tampering with the very forces of nature in the competitive process as they have shaped business rivalry over time. And oh yes, you use nationalist pressures to control who can invest beyond some legitimate conception of national security. And you limit who can come into your country. Think of the long-term effects on competition, the competitive process, the assembly of human talent. If you make it harder for people who want to work hard or are really smart and have good ideas, and you say you can't come to our country, either as laborers in specific sectors or at the higher end providing advice and ideas, you limit that flow of knowledge and capacity over time and the motivation that often comes with it. You're playing with a fundamental force that has made competition more important and more effective in many jurisdictions. Third, the elites and the institutions they love, the international bodies, like the one over in the 16th here, on the campus, at the Chateau, a glorious week-long set of meetings. If many of the antagonists to this order and these developments had been able to watch that program and seen how much it cost, what do you think they would think of it if it had been broadcast? And how much support will we see for the continuing development of institutions that are crucial over time to provide support for standard setting, convergence, and cooperation over time? Are we going to see a diminished interest in paying money for that, especially by a large North American country that pays for about 25% of that organization across town? And last, are we going to see pressure to perform new roles? The populist agenda that Michael was referring to, the impulse to redistribute wealth, are competition agencies going to be leaned on to do this more? Be positive agents for redistribution. Be agents for protection in using merger control where you have discretion at the margin. In short, to warp the traditional roles that they've played, and oh, by the way, I think lots of traditional competition law has fabulous distribution effects. The agencies just don't advertise it too much. It's not a banner on top of the building. But are they going to be pushed more in the direction of doing things that I would assert are not in their core competency and pose a danger of stretching them outside the realm of what they do well? So nothing on that slide is good for this group. These are all sobering developments. Should we pull the covers back over our heads and give up? Or are there antidotes? Well, happily, I think there are. There's a way ahead. part of it becomes an element of a larger effort to